A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, it is a period of environmental devastation and corporate greed. When a small group of young people see older generations apparently determined to destroy the world they call home, especially certain companies, the only option remaining seems to be responding with destruction in kind. But such drastic action will not come without a cost, and it isn't clear whether every member of the group is willing to pay it. 6 Degrees of Star Wars is produced on the unceded ancestral lands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket nations. Learn whose land you are on at native-land.ca and find out what actions you can take in support of those nations. How to Blow Up a Pipeline includes depictions of property damage, gun violence, and bodily harm. Please proceed according to your needs and comfort level. Furthermore, the discussions concerning the content of this film are intended solely as critique, as this podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed therein are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers. Hello there, and welcome back to 6 Degrees of Star Wars, the podcast where we explore all the ways George Lucas's flagship franchise surrounds us, binds us, and penetrates us in the landscape of cinema. I'm your host, Sam Marchioni. Joining me today, Connor Duffy.
Good evening, and just for purposes, my lawyer has informed me that I must always make sure to mention how much I love How to Blow Up a Pipeline in fiction. If I do not add the words in fiction at the end, I've been advised that I may be in some trouble. So, pleasure to be here.
And for the very first time, please welcome Jake Brody.
Greetings, heroes! Hi, Jake Brody, aka Database Ranger of Database Ranger's Power Reviews, and the host of Let's Be Superheroes.
And boy, oh boy, are we looking at some superheroes, anti-heroes, question mark? We are talking about, in honor of Native American Heritage Month, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. This is a 2022 action thriller that came out and is based on a book by Andreas Malm. It features a ton of really talented young actors, one of which is our degree 4, Marcus Scribner as Sean, but the most prominent native face you might have seen in it is Forrest Goodluck as Michael, and it's a hell of a movie, so let's get into it. I wasn't expecting it to be quite as much of a tutorial as it was.
They do go into a lot of detail. I figure for my perspective, I'm coming in as somebody who has over a decade of experience analyzing media starring a young and diverse group of people saving the world with explosion. That's the background I'm coming.
Okay, I think we're past 5, but I would call them overbearing and over-emotional.
This is true. We're at 8, which places it kind of right in sort of the SPD territory in terms of number of kids. But obviously, these are not cops.
One of them's kind of a cop. Spoilers.
It is an excellent film, and one that feels so dicey to even search for. Like, you feel, anytime I go to look up something on this movie, I feel like I'm putting myself on a list. But the fact that it's now available on Disney Plus makes me feel a little bit more comfortable.
A little bit more comfortable. It was also available on Canopy from my local library, so thank you for that, Canopy. Always love your work. And I think I was already on this list that says, I'm a writer, I swear.
Yeah.
Exactly.
After many years as a writer and a dungeon master for D&D, I've gotten very used to adding the words in fiction or movie at the end of statements that might otherwise get me on a watch list.
And I think it's fascinating, like, in terms of a movie with this title, a book with that title, able to be out there and approved to be out there.
Utterly shocked that it made it. It definitely benefited from coming out in 2022. You could not release this movie in 2025.
No, you could not. That absolutely not. It would not fly.
You certainly wouldn't be able to release it with such a positive, sympathetic depiction of the protagonists. Like, I don't think the movie makes any bones about the fact that the people we're following, they're the good guys.
Yeah.
They're committing, they're committing a crime, but their motivations across the board are absolutely justifiable. as
You might
depicted in the
almost say
movie.
it's like blowing up a Death Star.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things in terms of how, the content of the movie. A number of people in various industries took this film very seriously as a potential threat. But when you think about our actual media landscape, we're constantly dealing with groups of people who go to commit actual violence, who are absolutely portrayed as the heroes, killing people left and right. This is something that is just a natural part of our media landscape. But this movie, which is about a singular act of property damage, is considered deeply subversive by comparison. We don't look at, like, the Expendables and then start to get more concerned about something like that. But How to Blow Up a Pipeline, that raises eyebrows and gets people nervous.
Maybe because it's real?
I mean, it's not describing an actual event, but it is very much depicting something that is so grounded and rooted in reality.
Yeah, the depiction of the events, they're very straightforward. They're presented with very little. It's very funny to say is they're presented with very little sort of like heightened drama. They're other than the fact that, like, they're making this is homemade explosives. You don't need to add any extra drama or conflict. The thing could literally blow up in their face at any moment.
Something I also really like about the way it's shot, combined with just, as I mentioned, you feel like you're getting onto a list when you go to sign up to watch this movie. But even the way that it's shot, it engenders a sense of complicity. It feels like you are there with them, going through this process with them. I first watched it a year or two ago, and then, rewatched it this week to get it fresh in my mind. And I was noticing those opening shots where you're meeting each of the characters. The camera is following right behind them, almost as if you are following them as you are part of the crew going through there. And a lot of the shots are like that.
It's not a heist movie. You're just heisting something in instead of out.
Yeah.
But I think it's also noteworthy that, like, we've had movies like this that mine these based on real events for drama. Like, the one I thought about when Theo had her leukemia diagnosis was, like, Erin Brockovich, because I've seen that scene of Julia Roberts listing off all of the various plaintiffs' injuries and medical expenses and traumas that have happened because they were poisoned by lead. I'm like, same shit. And in 3 months, maybe, we will be seeing people suing data centers for generative AI for exactly this kind of stuff, if they're not already doing it.
100%.
I'm sure they are already doing it. And to them, I say, good luck. I salute you. And if you start a GoFundMe for your legal funds, I will pour into it.
Yes. I think, like, when we first meet Michael, it's a tracking shot into the back room, like you're being ushered in to, like, a secret that you're being let in on. I also like the flashback structure. It's very Lost in that way, as so many things post-Lost have been. Although, considering it's a heist movie, maybe a better comparison would be Reservoir Dogs. But I like that it actually takes a while before we start getting the flashbacks of the characters, because it keeps you uncertain of them for a good long stretch, at the same time that they're feeling very uncertain about each other. And again, that leads to that immersive, complicit feeling that you get watching the movie, which I think really helps make it so gripping.
Yeah, the flashbacks do a very good job as well of adding the sort of thriller elements. We get little bits and pieces of information. We find out, I guess, at the end of the first act, more or less, about halfway in, that there is a mole. They've got a rat in the house. And so the tension then becomes, what's going to happen here? Is she going to get discovered? Are they actually going to be able to pull this off? Or are the feds about to sweep in at any moment? And so you have this wonderful element of unknowing. And I love that it keeps you on your toes. That particular, like, thread of the overall plot is constantly twisting and turning. So it kind of adds that uncertainty that you need in a film, that you need in any story. It adds that sense of uncertainty in this otherwise very straightforward, almost documentary style depiction of this disparate group of people coming together to carry out this act of massive sabotage.
Literally, the only thing missing is talking heads, which would deeply undermine the tone of the movie.
Yeah, apparently, I did a little reading up on it, and the score is apparently composed of oil drum sounds from the desert mixed with synthesizers. The composer apparently said it was like the most difficult movie he's ever scored, but he really wanted to like capture that gritty, grounded feel, and so it was like beating oil drums just out in the desert on the shoot.
Well, it worked.
Yeah, it's like a heartbeat at times, but distorted and wrong and dirty and metallic, just like what the oil derricks are kind of doing to the landscape. And the movie was put together so quickly, too.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about independent films like this, is that you have a quick turnaround, you keep the team small, because our screenwriters, one of them is the director, one of them is one of our lead actors, Ariela Barrera, who is playing Sochi, Hispanic. I believe they don't specify whether she's Mexican or not, but Sochi is an indigenous Nahuatl name. So we have Sochi, played by Ariela Barrera, I'm so sorry for mangling that name. I think I've got Melissa Barrera in my head now. But we have Sochi, whose mom died because of a heat wave caused by in-air pollution from oil refineries. We've got Theo, who has leukemia from growing up near these kinds of oil companies, and her girlfriend, Alicia. We've got Michael, who is a native from North Dakota, who has deep-set resentment for justifiable reasons for oil workers in the oil industry and everything connected to that, who's been roped in to help with the boom of it all. They also have Dwayne, who is, the blue-collar Texan who had his property seized because eminent domain. And then we have the annoying white ones.
Yes, Logan and Rowan.
Who are just down to clown. But that's one of the strengths of the film, is that when these characters come together, with few exceptions, they don't really know each other. They come from different angles, different like geographic regions. They cross paths through social media, and they communicate through apps like Signal.
This is a period piece because Twitter is still Twitter.
Twitter was radicalizing for saving the planet. That's a little moment in time.
The reason the FBI didn't really pay too much attention or infiltrate the Signal chat or Telegram chat, whatever they were using to communicate with each other, was because they had very cleverly named it "White Boys for Life," and therefore the feds had weren't interested.
Yeah, this seems like about the appropriate amount of violent rhetoric for white guys. Keep it going.
Yeah, like to my earlier point, like I appreciate that, like it's a racially diverse group who all have their own reasons for being involved in this, all of which are depicted as equally important and equally justifiable.
Yeah.
Their motivations are equally justifiable, whether it be they're losing their property, or there are people getting pushed off the land, or developing illnesses, etc.
It's an excellent way to show the multifaceted impacts of the fossil fuel industry on the real world. You just are touching in with all these different ways in which it impacts people through these different characters and their lives. And I think that's handled incredibly well. Even in some cases where it's just how it's affecting their loved ones, not even necessarily them directly, as with Alicia, who's in it more for Theo than for anything else in many respects.
Get you a girlfriend like Alicia, because my God.
She will take a drum to the leg for you.
She will take a drum to the leg for you while categorically disagreeing with you significantly, because one of the things that both I appreciated and had my eye twitching is the all too accurate depiction of leftist infighting.
Yes.
Arguing about, oh, well, Jesus was actually a terrorist, and, the revisionist history that goes into Martin Luther King was on the FBI watch list. And, Alicia is making a point that has standing. Like, she's saying, yeah, you're doing this flashy stuff. You're gonna stick it to a company, but it is also going to hurt poor people. And, one of the biggest things that has been a sticking point amongst the most left is that a lot of them get paralyzed with the fear of not wanting to hurt anyone, and therefore they are inactive. They are basically doing armchair politics. Well, you forgot about this, that, and the other thing. How dare you participate in society while saying we should improve it?
But at the same time, one thing I find kind of interesting is that, with Shochi and Sean, they were originally part of the climate group that's focused on divestments. And technically speaking, that's still what they're trying to accomplish throughout the film. It's just they are presenting this force that's outside the normal realm of their action to further motivate negotiations with the types of groups that they were a part of. Much like Martin Luther King Jr. Came to respect and appreciate the more extreme groups pushing for civil rights because it allowed him to be, positioned more as a reasonable compromise. The old diversity of tactics combined with the shifting of the Overton window.
When we meet the college group that is, preparing to protest and demand divestment, etc., the one element that kind of undercuts the idea that it should be a more complex discussion of what is acceptable, what are acceptable processes of affecting change. The depiction of like the guy who's sort of running the meeting, I guess he's being presented as that particular type of leftist or liberal individual who kind of has a safe amount of distance from the most extreme form of the damage. His mother is never going to die in a heat wave, to be most blunt. So it's important then that you do have like Alicia later on, who is able to make a more understandable argument about whether or not what they're doing is a good idea as a whole, because she's kind of more in it, like her partner is literally dying because of the actions of energy companies. And by extension, then, she's probably familiar with like Xochi's family or the broader social circle. So it almost misses the opportunity to present a more complicated argument about what we're seeing in the film, because until we get a little bit more of Alicia and her background and her concerns and fears, we don't really get a lot of pushback against what is happening. And the people who would potentially push back are presented in ways to make them look, I don't want to say useless, but certainly less effective than what they're doing.
The film definitely has an opinion on who is in the right in many respects. It's making the argument that the book made as well. Not that I've read it, I just, I've skimmed the synopses, but that argument that it needs to go beyond. And you can see that framing based off of how they depict not just that one leftist organizer in the climate group at the beginning, but also the documentarian as well, who's also acting from this sort of removed perspective, not really in it, trying to pull things out of people who are actively suffering. When we look at when Dwayne and his wife are being interviewed, they're kind of being used by the documentarian for the documentarian to make their point, rather than necessarily really taking action that's strictly on their behalf. And there's that overall message in the film that it should be coming from these people these are the people who you need to be listening to, are the people who are actually in it, or who are willing to put themselves on the line, who are suffering and need to be taking action. And you can tell that perspective based off the juxtaposition with the other characters that we meet.
I think it is also making a statement about, to do something like this, you have to go all in. There cannot be any wiggle room, which is, I think, why they go for what they go for at the end with, spoiler alert everyone, Theo and Sochi decide to take the blame. They basically rig it up so that all the evidence of anybody other than them and Rowan, the FBI informant, being in on it.
Yeah.
And so Sochi and Theo are sent to prison. Rowan gets a payout and learns absolutely nothing from all of this, which is not my favorite part.
Well, I know that when it comes to those two, Rowan and Logan, they're very much in there by choice. Logan especially. Rowan has been kind of forced into it by her circumstances with the FBI, but she wouldn't be in those circumstances if not for choosing the saboteur lifestyle. And when you think about it, like, so many of these people, because you don't know them until you see where they're coming from, you wonder how committed to a mission they really are. plays into that sort of lack of trust that you kind of have at the beginning. And it's strongest with Rowan and Logan because of Rowan being the FBI informant especially, and because of their overall attitude. But at the same time, you see their commitment, whereas in like a typical heist movie, they'd be the screw-ups who mess up everything. Logan takes a bullet in the movie. He ends up having literal permanent scars. We see it, in the little after effect. And yeah, they can move on with their lives to other things, but at the same time, I suspect they probably didn't. I suspect they're still taking action because it's a life that they chose and that they are likely to continue to choose.
In a way, because they are depicted as, if anything, maybe the weak link, even before you learn that Rowan is, against her will, an FBI informant. Even then, like you say, they take probably the biggest risk because two security dudes show up with guns and very quickly adapt and react to the situation and risk physical injury and perhaps even death in order to carry out their part of the plan. So in a sense, when you put them in this group of people all carrying out this action together, in a way, it's like the film is telling you, you can't always choose who your allies are going to be. You kind of have to accept that although the personalities may clash, the intentions are going to be pure.
And I feel like that moment when the guys show up with the guns is the moment when you realize that these two really are all in, because they're like, we cannot let these guys go into danger. We need to save their lives. And I'm going to take a bullet from these guys to save their lives. Like, that is a genuinely selfless action. One that's not really necessarily in the cause, but from the moral standpoint.
I'll give it to Logan. I'm still iffy on Rowan just because it's hard not to feel that she's acting with some level of security within herself. Like, because she has this deal with the FBI, she has this kind of security blankie. She knows that they will take care of her. This will not affect her in the long term.
I would argue, though, that she also takes quite a risk because in order for this plan to work, she has to let other people in this group know, hey, the FBI arrested me and they want me to rat people out. And so she had to explain that, and also that had to become a part of the plan to make sure that only a couple of them were going to get arrested and everyone else got away with it. If her nerves got the better of her, if she messed up her story in any way, then it could have completely fallen apart. This whole ruse that was being set up to make sure that everyone else got away with it, including Rowan and Logan. So she certainly has like the benefit of maybe being able to walk away, but only if the FBI never suspects that she is essentially a double agent.
It's a little bit of both. She does have a little bit of that security due to the deal with the FBI, but at the same time, she's also the only one the FBI actively have their eyes on.
I don't think that's true. We do see, like, the scary black van following Sean.
I'm referring to before the job, because obviously after the job, the FBI are going to be tracking Sochi's associates, and so I don't think any of them were on the FBI's radar, apart from Rowan and ostensibly Logan, until after the job. So she is putting herself at risk by trying to play the FBI when they're holding, like, potentially 15 years or whatever it was in prison over her head. Like, that is a risk that she is taking to not just turn them over for real, and instead to actually play the FBI. And it's one that works out well for her. She gets a payday. But something with respect to the handling of Logan and Rowan that I find kind of interesting. And it ties in with something I've been learning, getting involved with various local community support groups. I've been doing media work for National Union of the Homeless, Nonviolent Medicaid Army, and Poor People's Campaign in recent months. And I've been to their Zoom meetings. And one of the major tenets that they focus on is that movements for change should be led by the poor and dispossessed. The people who are suffering the most under this system, who are the ones who have the most to gain and the least to lose by disrupting. And I feel like Rowan and Logan sort of demonstrate, to a degree, how those who are not in that position should be following the lead of the others. Like, when you get right down to it, Sochi and Theo are the faces. They're the ones who are leading the way in many respects. Sean in support of Sochi, and Logan and Rowan are basically like, hey, are you a dumb white person like these two are? Listen to the other people around you, follow their lead, and be willing to take the bullet because you can probably get away with it and they can't.
That is a very fair point to make, but I will also say, don't make out in your crime scene.
Yeah, no, they're still very dumb. I did not say they were smart.
No, they are committed.
I said they're
not
committed.
Smart, but they're committed. Yeah.
I will resist the urge to figure out what their D&D stats are. I will resist the urge to figure out what their D&D stats are.
High dex, low wisdom.
Logan's got a decent constitution.
Oh yeah.
I also find it interesting that, and again, it's just about the way that we frame these discussions. There's all this like, oh no, they're glorifying these criminals who are blah, 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 blah. It's a violent thing that they're doing. But when you get right down to it, it's a matter of how you frame what is and is not legitimate violence.
Hi, I'm from Boston. Ask me about our tea parties.
Exactly. They're not actually hurting anyone. Not physically. They are not physically attacking anyone. So it's not violence in that sense. It's violence against property, which is a very different kind of violence. But there's probably much less question with regards to, oh, these guys with guns defending the property, that's just a natural thing you got to be concerned about. But these guys are just maintenance workers. Why are they armed and shooting at somebody who is fleeing? Like, we want to talk about who's actually, committing crimes here? That's attempted murder right there.
Yeah, but it's also Texas.
It is. It's Texas in the desert, so, yeah.
I would need to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure Texas has a stand your ground law of some kind, and one could argue, a lawyer probably would argue that maintenance workers would be standing their ground in their capacity as representatives of the company. They have a duty to protect the property or something like that, because heaven forbid the property get damaged.
And again, that's kind of the framing of it. But when you get right down to it, it's like, they were chasing him for a good long while, trying to shoot him. That is 100% attempted murder in many respects. Now, it might not technically be, chargeable. If it's like, oh, if you were caught trying to commit a felony,
Texas Penal Code, Chapter 9, Subchapter D, if we want to talk about the protection of property. I'm not interested in reading all of this legalese, but not at all surprising that the maintenance workers have guns and will shoot people.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's just another juxtaposition with what is and is not considered acceptable violence. Chasing somebody and shooting at them, apparently acceptable if they were outside a property and did some damage to your car, but property damage of something that is actively killing you and your family, that's not acceptable. How we frame what is and is not considered violence is something that is a major conversation, I think, especially in the context of when we look at things like protests, especially the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020, when there's all the discussion of what does and does not count as peaceful, what is and is not violence. I always see the whole thing of 93% of them were peaceful, and then there's but there were these cases where people were burning cities. And again, burning cities, but burning some piece of property.
I'm sorry, that's also just what happens whenever a major city wins a sports ball game.
But also, in those moments where it turned violent, who initiated the violence in those cases is very rarely actually, I think, addressed. And, in many cases, it's the authorities who initiate violence, and then the violence against property is the reaction to violence. We hear about buildings burning down, but we don't hear about were people being killed by protesters, which wasn't really happening. But protesters were being injured by police, and those were violent incidents. We look at the film, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. The big focus is on the violence against the pipeline, but not necessarily on the people who are trying to shoot the ones who are trying to blow up the pipeline. It's, again, that framing of what is and is not considered acceptable violence, and how violence against property can often be treated as less acceptable than violence against individuals, which is morally not great.
It is morally devastating. It's also pretty indicative of capitalism, because what's going to make you more money? A human person or a machine?
This is a cheerful discussion, I know. So cheerful. Maybe it would be a little bit more upbeat if they had a little bit of a wardrobe change in there. Toss on some colored spandex. Everybody's going to be fine with you.
No, what we need is a giant robot finding another giant robot.
It does make most things better. Except for, okay, maybe it doesn't work out great for the warehouse district. But again, violence against warehouse districts, perfectly fine.
It always comes back in the next episode.
Yeah, all those warehouses tend to be empty anyway, devoid of people and objects that you normally find in a warehouse. So really, you're just kind of clearing away old unused property for redevelopment.
I still love the old show Megas XLR, when you get a pair of idiots from Jersey, get a hold of a giant robot, fight aliens and whatnot, and end up destroying all of Jersey every episode, and then it's back to the next episode.
I think that's just New Jersey.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Nobody seemed to really notice.
But I do want to bring this back because probably the most famous anything in the United States to do with a pipeline is the Dakota Access Pipeline and Standing Rock. And that was doing active harm. That was directly violating the rights of the native people that lived in that area. It was in violation of treaties. It was just wrong. It was categorically wrong, and DAPL is still kind of ongoing. I was looking it up. There are still cases being litigated in relationship to it, which is both incredibly frustrating and also completely understandable because it hasn't stopped being a problem.
It is not.
This is still affecting the Sioux people.
It comes back again to what is and is not acceptable violence. I've heard the definition of a state is the entity that has the monopoly on violence for a region, basically. And therefore, they get to decide what is and is not acceptable violence. And in a capitalist society, if that is the economic system that we are prioritizing, then the state will inherently choose to protect it, and so utilize that monopoly on violence to prioritize the accumulation of capital over human lives. And that's just the structure of our society. Without trying to hyperbolize or anything, that's just how it's structured.
And when you're that clear about it, it's makes it a lot of sense that some people would believe that the only appropriate response is with a form of violence in turn. You could argue the degree to whether or not it is an equal level of violence. As you were saying earlier, as we were earlier in the discussion, they don't directly kill anybody. Their action is literally they blow up of an oil pipeline. They don't even cause any kind of environmental damage beyond the explosion because they shut off the valve to make sure that there's no oil flowing through when the explosion goes off. But as was mentioned earlier, then what is the knock-on effect of that? The gas prices go up and therefore people are unable to afford it, and do energy costs spike or lower? How does that affect people? The movie never really explores, I think, that aspect of it. I understand why. There's no really time to spend on the fallout of their actions. And I understand why, because you're writing and making a very taut, effective, dramatic thriller.
It moves at a clip.
It really does. And I think the pace would be affected somewhat if what followed was 40-minute House committee meeting on the effect of...
Just saying it, I want to stab my eye out with a fork.
They definitely ended the story at the right point, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think part of the argument that the film makes is if you choose to take this action, the results are not guaranteed. The results are not clearly known. You may know how it will affect you. You will not know how it will affect the world. And it's a choice. Each of these people are making a choice. They're making a calculated risk with the belief that what they're doing will make a difference, but without the knowledge of if it will make a difference or not. And I think that if they were to try and either show, they have this much effect, but not that much effect, I feel like it would not be quite so in line with that ethos of the film of, no, you need to make this choice not knowing what the outcome may be.
Speaking as someone who has pretty bad anxiety and very much their autism, the amount of time I have spent paralyzed by fear, catastrophizing, strategizing every possible outcome of every possible choice I could make has caused me more pain than if I had just done what I needed to do. I have stayed in really toxic situations because I was too afraid to make more trouble for myself, and I got more trouble as a result. So decisive action is, I think, the main takeaway anybody should have from this movie. And you can understand why certain energy companies might have been a little twitchy, given that the site for this movie had a full map of pipelines. And people are coming out of this like, wow, decisive action really does seem like the most effective way to get a message across. Are we connecting the dots?
Yeah.
We didn't connect shit. No, I've connected them.
Yeah.
For legal reasons, this is a joke. It is not meant to be taken seriously.
To the NSA agent who has to listen to every episode of this podcast, hope you're enjoying it as much as we are.
And I would also like to say that NSA agent, I'm curious if you are interested in Star Wars, do you also like Power Rangers? Because I've got literally hundreds of hours of me talking about it out there on the internet.
Get in the comments.
Yeah. I will also say I definitely, absolutely relate as someone on the autism spectrum, someone who, was diagnosed with ADHD in my late 30s, plenty of anxiety. I call it autistic ADHD anxiety hybridization, or
Oh, no.
I think that is the appropriate acronym. But going around not just to the message of the film, but also the aesthetics of the film, I think that the way that they have the landscape shots are fantastic. I think that they do an excellent job choosing these locations with these massive oil refineries in the background. They just feel like alien and oppressive, and you feel the threat from them as they just tower over people in the background. You kind of first see them in the flashback with Sochi. You see as they're just looming over her, behind her, as she's processing her mother's death. You see it on the reservation with Michael staring them down and trying to figure out how to take down these giants and not knowing what to do.
Remember when that shit was like actively bad in animated movies? Like, remember Fern Gully?
Fern Gully.
Like, would we take the looming towers, billowing ugly smoke into the sky more seriously if it sang and was voiced by Tim Curry? Is that what needs to happen in reality?
Unfortunately, I think that movie awakened too many things and too many people that were not productive. But it's remarkable how, when you look, especially, when I was growing up in the 90s with Captain Planet, Fern Gully, all these things where it was clearly communicated to us, hey, you should care about the environment. Hey, rich tycoons are evil. And people kind of shrugged it off like, oh, it's just silly exaggerations. And then you get to adulthood and you're like, oh, wow, you guys kind of downplaying a little bit. It's remarkable to me how many villains were explicitly based off the man who has somehow become president of the country for a second time. Like, explicit basis for straight up Saturday morning cartoon villains.
I think that this movie was also very smart not to really give the oil company any kind of a face.
Yes.
The closest we get to a proper antagonist is the FBI. And, the FBI is exactly the kind of villain that you have in this sort of thing, but framing this kind of energy companies as this malevolent, almost eldritch force that is largely faceless.
Yes.
It feels appropriate to the mythologizing that Americans respond to the most of, the David and Goliath kind of story.
And it's also, it's more accurate. You look at, like, Michael starting a fight with the one oil worker, and his mom's just like, this guy's just here trying to work and support his family. And it's like, yeah, but the thing he's working for is trying to destroy our home. Or the guys who chase after Logan and shoot him. And you have the FBI. They're all just agents of this larger entity, but none of them are actively in control of it. They're just serving.
They're just tendrils of one gigantic beast that no one person or even one committed group of people can defeat, because ultimately what our protagonists are fighting against is the entire system of energy production, and by extension how capitalism has affected the system of energy production. There is a vested interest in maintaining a need for oil and gasoline and fossil fuels for as long as those things are profitable, and the system is designed in place to maintain their profitability. So yeah, it's a very good point that, we never get anybody who is trying to give the big speech about, think of the poor oil company executives who are just sitting in Dallas and are so upset.
The movie shows no sympathy for them.
How are they going to be able to afford their vacation to Cancun in the middle of a cold snap?
in a lesser movie, they would be represented by someone like the worker that Michael gets into a fight with, and he says something about how, like, we keep America running. We're the ones who provide the grease that keeps the wheels of industry going. You know, it'd be some bullshit speech.
Yeah.
Some network, you have meddled with the forces of nature, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
This is not a
exactly.
both sides movie.
This is definitely not a both sides movie. And it's all the better for it. Sometimes a film just has to take a stand on a contentious issue.
Honestly, it's interesting to think about this in comparison to a different movie you and I were recently talking about in the last couple of weeks, Connor, that has a different name, but you could also call it How to Blow Up a Parliament in Fiction.
Yeah.
That was a V for Vendetta joke in case anybody missed it. Go check out the episode from In Each Retelling, our sibling pod.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering. I'm like, I didn't think you guys had done that on this show.
Jake, we have a vastly connected web. I have a droid that navigates the multiverse.
Nice.
It's a whole thing.
Well, I've been through the multiverse a bit. I've met a few me's. They were not friendly.
To get back to the point I was trying to make, it's very interesting to look at V for Vendetta as this much more stylized and at times romanticized notion of what terrorism, because both V for Vendetta and How to Blow Up a Pipeline are movies that are following people the government labels as terrorists, and it is treating them with sympathy. It is exploring why is terror, and as someone who literally started her education on September 11th, 2001, whose development was by and large shaped in a landscape that was very much concentrated in the war on terror of it all, it is something that I've definitely grappled with. Like, in our very first episode covering A New Hope, I made one of those shitty jokes about Luke being indoctrinated into a cult and radicalized as a terrorist and committing a war crime from a certain point of view, but I was doing that to be a little shit. My childhood was chock full of stories about scrappy bands of revolutionaries coming together to defeat the corrupt forces that were taking over and or destroying the world. Avatar: The Last Airbender, Witch, The Hunger Games. A lot of the popular culture produced in America over the last 25 years has been, in one way or another, grappling with our relationship to propaganda and imperialism and narrative and systemic violence.
One thing I find interesting with V for Vendetta as a work of adaptation is the film often gets criticized as simplifying and sensationalizing the original graphic novel, which is this interplay between anarchism and fascism, displaying both as flawed and in conflict with one another. It's a very nuanced work. But one thing I've found interesting, much like with the Captain Planet stuff, as I've gotten older, is that sensationalized version is, in many respects, while maybe less nuanced, a more honest representation of how these things actually seem to manifest in the real world. Like, you look at the fascists in V for Vendetta, the film, versus the comic, and in the comic, they kind of work strategically and quietly. In the film, they're big and they're threatening, and then you look in modern day, and it's like, oh yeah, no, fascists are loud and gaudy and stupid in how they behave. You also look at anarchism in the film versus the graphic novel. The graphic novel displays it also very dangerously, because he is actively, a bomb-throwing terrorist. And that there's all this chaos as a result of the collapse of the society. And in the film, it's much more of a unifying outside the government through solidarity, which does seem to actually be, if you research anarchist lines of thought, more in line with what they actually fight for. That sense of community and solidarity across the country, operating outside of a governmental structure. And so I do find that interesting as I've gotten older, that the more nuanced take actually is arguably farther from the core of what actually defines those ideology. And I think that it's, kind of, again, that similar thing of the difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist comes down to, in many respects, how you frame their ideology. Is it one that's rooted in chaos? Is it one that's rooted in meaningful change and actual freedom? And I think that's one of the things that make these protagonists so sympathetic, is that you see where they're coming from, and it's treated with respect, and it's treated with intelligence. You can see they're thinking through, in many respects, what could be the impact, and still making the choice because the alternatives are unacceptable. And I always find it interesting, as somebody who's, again, super Power Rangers fan guy, that those simplified childhood portrayals of good and evil are a lot more honest and true to life than we give them credit for. That sometimes the simpler choices are actually the correct choices that are often muddied and obscured through nuance, through, oh, well, this guy is just trying to take care of his family, and that's why he's working for the oil company, and we can't take away his job because then, there will be all these repercussions, and it takes you, by getting too far in the weeds, away from the larger discussion of, but this thing is killing everyone right now.
I'm now disappointed that, like, The Good Place never tried to assess that, because, like, one of the biggest things of The Good Place was all about unintended consequences, and I think that one of the things that this movie really does is, like, interrogate people's relationship to consequences. And one of the things I really liked about how the last little ending bit played out was that the people who got away, and even the people who didn't get away, were reflecting on it in different ways, and you get this sense of, like, them asking, was it worth it? Whether it's, a look from your disapproving relative, the idea that a black van is now going to be following you for the rest of your life, sitting in a prison cell, and then we end on a Florida man.
Yeah. It's not a happy ending. There is no happy ending in this story. There's just an accomplishment. A successful accomplishment in that they did what they set out to do, and there's a catharsis in that. But they recognize that this, it's not the end of what they're dealing with. And no singular event could be. And I think that's a much stronger nuance than trying to use the suffering of people who are tied up in capitalist systems to defend those systems. And, we see that in all sorts of conflicts as well. It's not just, the fossil fuel industry, but obviously, there's the Israel-Palestine conflict, where you can make the argument of, when you get into the individual stories, it makes everything feel so much muddier, and you lose sight of, okay, but which side is the one who's actively engaging in disproportionate violence and displacement and all those other conflicts? There's so much that can be discovered through nuance, but there's also so much that can be obscured through nuance that can make the indefensible seem like it's natural. And I think that applies to violent conflicts, it applies to economic issues, and it applies to the fossil fuel industry. You get too much in those weeds, you lose sight of what the aim is. And I think that these characters do a really good job of keeping their focus on what they're doing and why. And I think the movie does a good job of keeping that focus as well, by keeping it so tight on this is what they're doing, this is why they're doing it. And you can decide what you want to do for yourself.
By taking a snapshot, by taking just a moment in time and cutting before you really get a feeling for the fallout of their actions, it does an excellent job of leaving you to debate with yourself as to whether or not their actions were justified, whether their actions were beneficial in the short or long term. Throughout the film, you get the sense that the filmmakers want you to know that they are justified in the way that they feel, and so you can sympathize and understand why they would carry out this action. And I think up to a point of saying, what they're doing, I don't know if the film goes so far as to say what they do is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think you could infer that if you wanted to, but because the ending of the film does have that sort of muddiness to it, has that uncertainty to it, the answer is not as straightforward as the previous sort of 90, 100 minutes runtime would have you believe.
I actually think that was a brilliant last stroke to have the Florida people that were inspired by this group's actions.
Yeah.
Did they go and blow up a big company or anything? No, they went to a harbor and they blew up someone's yacht.
Yeah.
So they were inspired, but that doesn't seem like an action that's going to impact a company in any way. All that happens is a billionaire buys a new yacht.
It's a wonderful callback to what we see at the beginning of the film with a small act of violence, like the slashing the tires and leaving that same manifesto on the windshield.
Yeah.
And then we see a big action, like something that could actually have a knock-on effect. And in a way, it's almost like anyone who is inspired by that, then it's like the film is saying, like, once you've gone to a certain extreme, the lower level, less extreme stuff is still going to be pretty extreme. You can't just make your point by slashing tires anymore. You have to go and blow up some billionaire's yacht.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the film ends on that point where it leaves you with the sense of like, that is also an effect that their action had, regardless of what it did to the oil company's stock prices or the price of oil or people's opinion on like environmentalism and direct action, etc., etc. They also left an idea that if you want to make a statement, you can no longer make a quiet one, which I think is a kind of a reflection right now of like, at least here in the United States, like the current climate often makes it feel like if you want to make a statement, it has to be loud and expressive, whatever that statement may be, you know, whether it's hitting the streets and protesting or engaging in actual, for want of a better word, violent acts.
And I think it's also, as we're talking about the ending, it's notable that they could have ended at the end of The Job, but they choose to show that epilogue. One, because, you know, it is a trope of the heist movie that the structure is clearly inspired by. But two, because if they had just ended on the success of The Job, that would be a very satisfying ending of like, yeah, we did it, blah, 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 blah. But having that extra moment is like, but recognize that that's not how it's actually going to feel if you were to do this. That there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty, that there are consequences that could impact your entire life, and you don't know entirely what the rest of that would be. And that is, I think, a very responsible way that the movie makes its point, that it is simultaneously making its argument for more powerful direct action while also tempering that with realize that there is a cost, and you don't know what that cost will be for you or the work. And I think that brings us to kind of tackling this work as an adaptation. It's a fascinating work as an adaptation of a non-fiction book that is not a narrative. Like, I can't think of any other examples off the top of my head, except, I don't know, maybe How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, that adapts a non-fiction, like, article or essay into... I believe in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, or whatever it was like inspired by like an article from like a magazine or something, and then they turned it into a full movie.
Isn't The Big Short like a book about the housing market crash?
That would still be depicting the narrative of the crash. I say that having not seen the Big Short, so I may be incorrect.
The Man Who Stared at Goats, which is I guess it depends on how much of that story you think is fiction, but it is based on like a John Ronson
programs.
But
but it's still based off of stories. You can have nonfiction narrative works describing real events and then translating them into film. But the book is not describing events. It's describing an argument. It's looking at an analysis of social issues. And taking that and adapting it into a narrative is a very, I would argue, unique form of adaptation.
Oh my god, it's Brecht. This is exactly the kind of thing that Marxist theater, epic theater, whatever you want to call it, does. This is the kind of thing that Augusto Boal does with Theater of the Oppressed.
Yeah.
Just when you think you've gotten away, Brecht returns.
Bertolt, sit down.
I feel like that's a great aspect of the film that needed a shout out. That if you read a book that makes an argument and you're like, you know what? I want to demonstrate to other people what following this argument would look like, and use that as a way to complement the argument. They even give a nod to the book in the movie, being like, you know, it doesn't really tell you how to do
it. Yeah, and neither does this movie. Like, I joked about it being basically a tutorial or a documentary, but it's not like they're giving me the exact chemical compounds that I need. You know, and it's not something you can trial and error very easily.
Which they also demonstrate. It's like...
Yeah.
Michael sets himself on fire a few times.
Yep.
It would be like saying that, you know, Breaking Bad teaches you how to make meth. Like, it talks about, like, the basics of it, but doesn't really actually dig into it in any meaningful tutorial sense. It's simply a portrayal that is very grounded. And I feel like they could not effectively communicate the risks and danger and consequences of these choices without showing it in that degree of detail. If we just showed them taking the bomb out there without showing how dangerous it was to make the bomb, I think that would be a far more irresponsible presentation of the story and the argument. Everything is very deliberate in a way that is shockingly responsible in many respects. Even down to the job itself, the choice to minimize the spill, to control the damage, to minimize injury to others. It's showing consequences and taking responsibility for actions. All of it is very well handled. Outside of showing that, oh yeah, you could totally have a quickie out in the desert and everything will work out fine. Maybe you might take a bullet and that's about it.
Well, that feels like a good enough transition to be asking, is the Force with it?
I think the Force is with this movie. I was going to say, regardless of your political leanings, but I can't imagine many conservative people enjoying this movie, no matter what. So all I can say is it's a very well-written, exceedingly well shot, and very well acted, tight 100-minute thriller. The kind of thing you just don't see no more in the cinemas these days, with all your bing bang bells and whistles. It's a really well put together, very confident film. You can tell the confidence of the people in front of and behind the camera to depict a story that has so many dramatic moments and twists and turns in it. When the final twist happened at the end and found out that they knew that Rowan was a mole all along and they were going to use that to their advantage, my jaw literally dropped. I was like, oh my god, they got away with it.
Yeah,
more or less. Yeah.
So
Force
that's
is definitely
why there was a paper trail.
Yep.
I was so mad when I saw them texting the phone.
Oh yeah, I showed it to my wife earlier this week and they were just like, oh, you idiot, stop that. Oh, I bet she's the mole. Oh, no.
Yeah, Force is totally with this movie for me.
And I feel like I can safely say, as a physics teacher, that yes, the Force is with this. It is on the proper vectors.
Oh, God. You're going to awaken some old traumas in me, so I'll just wrap it up by making it unanimous. The Force is with it. I think we're all Sith now from a certain point of view, because we're dealing in absolutes, but hey, who's to say what the dark side is now?
When everyone's in agreement, that makes us Sith? Is that how that works?
Yeah, when we make it absolute.
Ah, I see. So we're looking at the magnitude of the Force. We're looking at it as a scalar rather than vector.
You're speaking math at me, and I only speak D&D math. So, who has Pluggables?
I have on the internet for quite some time, as I may have alluded to on numerous occasions. I am best known as Database Ranger of Database Ranger's Power Reviews, which was a web series that I produced across the course of 12 years with 100 episodes, focusing on a meta-narrative adaptation of the Power Rangers series and analyzing it and telling my own story, which was a Herculean task. But what I'm currently working on is Let's Be Superheroes, which is the new channel that I've been working on with Sam and others, focusing on community support organizations, raising funds for them, bringing spotlights onto important issues. We just released our healthcare horror stories for Halloween, and I know that we have other things in the pipeline.
Very funny. I saw what you did there.
But yeah, the channel is still very new this year. Could definitely use some love. And if you're a creator out there who is interested in joining this project, we are always looking for more hands on deck. So you can find me on Blue Sky as Database Ranger. I say I exist on Twitter. I don't really post on Twitter outside of just sharing videos that would make Elon Musk unhappy. And you can absolutely find me on YouTube at Database Ranger's Power Reviews, but more prominently now, Let's Be Superheroes. And you can also find me on Facebook at DR Production.
You can find me on Blue Sky at Young Mr. Duffy, where I occasionally make pithy remarks, but mostly just repost people who are much smarter than I am. I am one half of Third Country Press with my wife, Catherine. We make zines, RPGs, game supplements. A lot of it is pay what you want. The stuff that isn't is super cheap. You can find us on itch.io, Third Country Press, third-country-press.itch.io. There you go. Now you have the full URL. You have no excuse. And you can also find us every Thursday on BFF.fm. Really great community radio station coming out of California. We are Third Country Radio on that show. Every week we come up with a new theme and we play great music. We talk a lot, and we just have a good time. You can find the whole archive on bff.fm.
And in the spirit of Star Wars, to be there for the people who need us, this episode's Mutual Fund Spotlight goes to the United American Indians of New England, the fully volunteer-run and funded nonprofit dedicated to advancing Native rights both in New England and on a global scale. Since 1970, the UAINE has gathered in Plymouth on the fourth Thursday of November to honor Indigenous ancestors and Native resilience by protesting against the constructed mythology around the Pilgrims and unjust systems of settler colonialism at large. Though the 2025 National Day of Mourning has passed at the time of this episode airing, the fund is still open for donations. The link can be found in the description, as well as on my various socials at Demisem. Our theme music is provided by Refractory Period, the two girls, one beat synth pop sensation. You can follow them on Instagram at Refractory Period, the band. To further support this podcast, please subscribe to us on your platform of choice, leave reviews, and share with your friends to boost our visibility, and consider joining our Patreon. Now, normally this is the point in the show when I would be taking out my little chance cube and my dice tower and asking you to read off what we are going to cover next, but here on 6 Degrees of Star Wars, we have a little tradition, and as December is upon us, it's time to put the prequel trilogy to rest. So next time, we're covering Revenge of the Sith. So I technically did get it to the 20-year anniversary.
Not so fast, Darth Marchiotti!
Mike Fatum of Vengeance God streams? What are you doing here? And where did you get a lightsaber?
Sam, you know me. Why would you not think I already have a lightsaber?
Okay, fair point. So, I guess just, what are you doing here?
I'm here for justice. To make sure the people know the truth. That the prequel trilogy is held to account for its greatest sin.
Extremely tactless and outdated racial stereotyping?
Its second greatest sin.
Over-reliance on exposition dumping rather than showing narrative beats happening.
Okay, this is taking too long. I'm talking about the fight choreography.
Oh. I thought most people like that part of the prequels, if they like anything about them.
I'm not most people.
True. And I guess you do know a lot about that kind of thing as the founder and creative director of the epic live-action sci-fi fantasy sword-fighting experience known as the League of Swords.
Are you trying to flatter me into not pointing a lightsaber at you anymore?
Is it working? And would it help if I also mentioned that you've got your Kickstarter launching in December?
In fact, the preview page for our Kickstarter is live right now. We're doing our biggest show ever in February, and the Kickstarter is raising money for that. You'll be able to get live and virtual tickets to the show, as well as t-shirts, posters, and a ton of other excellent rewards. So head to leagueofswords.com right now to sign up and be notified the moment we launch.
Mike, did you just sneak ad copy into the sword fight?
Have at thee!
Ah!